Hey, welcome to this relatively short introduction to making levels in Kandria. So I've just booted up the latest demo and I haven't really done anything in it yet. It's just the beginning. As you can see, it's version 0.11, which is the last release at the point of this video. So Kandria has an integrated editor, so it's not a separate program, but rather part of the game itself. This means you can start or switch back and forth between editor and game at any point in time by simply hitting a button. This button is the section key, which should be located in the top left corner of your keyboard below escape. It might be labeled something different on your keyboard, but it should always be the top left key on your keyboard. So let's hit that now, and it switches into this editing mode. I can do this at any time, and by pressing it again, I go back into gameplay immediately. So, now that we're in editing mode, we can hold Alt and drag to zoom around and look around at stuff. We can also use the slider up here, or the plus and minus keys to zoom out and in and see everything that's there. You can also select the browse tool from the bottom here if you don't want to keep pressing Alt and you just want to browse around for a while. Now, the editor always has an active entity that it has selected. Right now we have this chunk selected, which is shown up here, and it's also outlined with this white line here. Everything that is selectable has a gray or blackish outline. So we can switch between the current selected entity and another by pressing Tab, which deselects it and then lets us pick another. Depending on what entity you pick, you get a different number of properties that show up here, and you get a different kind of default tool. Typically, though, it's the freeform tool, which lets you drag it around or resize it at the borders if it's a resizable thing. Some tools or some entities also have a sidebar pop up. So for instance, the chunks here show their tile set that they have available on the side. And a few other things also have additional tools available here. Chunks are the primary thing we're going to be concerned with when we're making levels. Those actually contain tiles and describe the available areas that the player can move around in. So as you can see, we have one chunk here that is connected to this other chunk on the side here. Whenever you have the end of a chunk, the camera automatically clamps to this, and it creates a sort of a transition between the chunks if the player should move between them. This allows you to segregate different parts of a challenge into individual rooms to give the player some breathing room. It's also just a good way to organize yourself and make sure that parts match up properly. So when we look around in this level parts of the demo here, you might even discover some things that you didn't see when you were playing the game on your own. Either way, now with this, we can already zoom around and sort of start changing stuff. So let's say, let's go into the desert here. Let's say I want to edit this. So let's select it, hitting Tab and then clicking on it. And now you can see that there's stuff visible that you normally don't see. So these red things here describe the solid tiles that you can actually interact with. Everything else that you can see is just for looks. Those are just visual tiles. The red tiles are always at the bottom of the sprite sheet, in the last row on the left. If you look here, we have a row of red tiles. Each of those have different interactions. Usually they're pretty self-explanatory from their icons. So the red blocks are just solid, so they're solid from all sides. These here are platforms that you can jump through. This just kills you. Here we have different forms of slopes. And then we have different spikes that are directional. So these spikes allow you, for instance, these spikes here allow you to pass through from below. In order to actually place these tiles, we need to switch into painting. For this, you can either press P or select the paint tool from the toolbar below. And then you can just drag things. By left-clicking, you place the current tile, and by right-clicking, you erase. So let's make a change and see how it actually plays. So we're going to place these blocks here. And now in order to test it, we're going to teleport the player to our current position in the editor. We can do this by pressing H for here. All right. So we've made some new interactions happen. As you can see, during gameplay, the red blocks were still visible. This is because once I started painting these solids in and selected them in the tile sheet here, it automatically flipped on this switch here. The switch means that we're now painting on the solids layer and everything we do is on there. And in order to make that easier to work with, it also makes them visible. It keeps this visibility during gameplay, which is useful for when you start hammering out a level without wanting to worry about like any visuals or anything. You can just keep that on and try the gameplay first. Once you do have something that you're happy with, you're gonna want to actually fill it in with something. So let's add a new block here to show that off. I'm just gonna press P again to paint, draw this in. And now, if I wanted to tile this in, I would have to deactivate the mode. Go to this middle layer here. This slider here says which layer that you paint your tiles on. There's 5 available, and the middle one is always meant for the ground. Let's look around in tile set here. Let's just pick the sandy stuff and start painting that in. Now, having to go back and forth and clicking like this is very slow and kind of painful. And instead you can use the scroll wheel. Scrolling naturally will go horizontally along the tiles, and scrolling vertically will go or holding shift and scrolling will go vertically along the tiles. You can always see which tile is currently selected in the bottom here. So if we go to this and we scroll, we go through these bottom tiles here. So let's just do that real quick. And then shift scroll to get to these. There we go. Now we can select one of these. Oop, made a mistake. There we go. And we're done. As you can see though, this is kind of not great. Doesn't look very good. And it's still very time consuming to do this. There is an easier way to get sort of an initial tiling in, and that's with the auto tiling mode. Once you have a region of solids laid out that forms a full encircled area, you can simply click in the middle of it while having the paint tool selected with Control held down. So Control click in the middle, and there's a problem. Oh boy. I wonder what the problem is now. Let's undo this. Don't know. Oh, I had the wrong set selected here. So this selection region here, some tile sets have different parts of I guess surface tiles in them at once. So in this here, you have both the camp, the desert, and miscellaneous ones. And in order to paint the desert tiles, I first had to select the desert set. Once I do this, I can control click and it'll automatically fill in the tiles according to some rules and randomize everything. So you can just keep clicking that for a bit until you have something that you like. Placing these solid tiles can also be a bit annoying doing that by hand, so there's another tool to help you do that more quickly. You can do this with the line tool. The line tool will always place solid tiles, so never any aesthetic tiles. And as you can see, let's make this a bit more visible here, it'll always try to build slopes according to the steepness that you drag it at. So this makes it very easy to just drag up a new area that the player can play with. Like this. Like this. Okay. Let's control click that again. There we go. Using this kind of prototyping approach, it goes pretty quickly. And you should probably try and keep it to this level of customization until you're really done with the gameplay interaction and you're happy with how it feels and plays. Once you're done with that, you can actually start adding some custom stuff like these rocks here. To do so, let's actually find something to place. For instance, this big structure here. So say I want to place all of this. Having to manually go through each of the tiles and placing them one by one is certainly not ideal. And fortunately, you don't have to do that. So first, let's say I want to place this in the background. And I want to stamp this entire thing down. So let's left click the bottom left corner of it, and then shift click the top right corner of it. As you can see now, it started changing these numbers here. These say how many tiles in horizontally and vertically you place at once. When you click now, it'll stamp this entire region from the tile set in. Also caught some extra stuff here, but we can just erase that away. So using this, it's much easier to place down these details. There's a lot of detail sprites, tiles in these tile sets that you can make use of to really bring out a different kind of feel and make it feel unique. So we can also place this and then erase that away. Oops. There we go. If you have tiles that can be repeated, so for instance, these ground tiles here, say I want to have this section and I want to repeat it, you can use the rectangle tool for that. The rectangle tool will always scale up sort of a pattern from the tiles region that you have selected. Another tool that is sometimes useful for when you need to bucket fill stuff is simply shift clicking. When you have the paint tool selected and say we are drawing some kind of background here. Let's see, do I even have any background elements? I'm not sure this one does. There's some building background stuff here. Let's say we have this painted in, and now I want to have this entire region painted in, so I can simply shift click and it'll bucket fill that in. Same for shift right click will bucket clear that area. Now, these layers that you can select here are quite important to get the look right. The center layer should always be reserved for the ground, just so that the tools can work with those and you don't accidentally end up drawing stuff and then deleting it by making a revision later. The layers to the right are obviously in front, and the layers to the left are in the back of the player. The player is always on the middle layer, and the middle layer then is drawn on top of the player. So if I place something on the middle layer here, you can see it's in front of the player. These left ones are behind. Using this and some clever tile placement can get quite varied environments. So for instance, if we go and zoom down over here, this office area, there's some complex overlapping going on, and you can sort of see this. While you place, it'll also automatically try to... What's happening now? Why is it not letting me paint? Oh, I hadn't selected a chunk. There we go. Now we're good. Paint. Right, so while you're placing, it'll always try to sort of blend out the other tile regions or tile layers, so that you always have a better idea of what you're working on and don't lose yourself in the different layers. So as you can see, we have a sort of a layer stacking going on the doors here, where parts of them are in the front and parts are in the back, to make sure that when the player walks through them, they appear properly. Using these kinds of tricks, you can get quite convincing effects. So let's get the player back here and show that in action. Another thing you might have noticed now is that the lighting changed quite drastically when the player moved here. When you have a chunk selected, the lighting information is stored in this GI property here. You also have the background, which shows which tiling or which parallax background is used in case you have areas that are empty. So for instance, if I paint a hole here, Let's quickly do that. The background is going to show through. Let's change this to, let's say, the desert. Or let's do the debug background. That's quite different. Or is it? Huh. Let's see. Desert one. Yeah, okay, that's different enough. Right. Unfortunately, right now, it's not possible for you to add more backgrounds of your own, so you're limited to the tile sets and backgrounds that are available here. In the same vein as the background, you can also choose the tile set that's actually used. So when you're creating new chunks, you probably want to pick your tile set first before you do anything else. So there's the region 1, the camp, and the debug and the tundra tile sets available. The debug tile set is quite useful for just hammering out level design ideas without having to worry much about what it looks like. Now back to the lighting. So the GI or global illumination part has several options. Having none just has a flat shading with no shadows at all, which is useful sometimes inside buildings. The tundra one, the desert one is above ground and uses sunlight. So depending on the time of day, the sun will determine where the shadows are. Since we're in an enclosed space here, that doesn't really show up at all because everything's just in shadow all the time. And then you have the different medium, dark, and extra dark ones that have different forms of darkness in the shadows. So if we go to extra dark, you can see it's a lot darker. You also have lights that are not part of the global illumination. So the global illumination is always one spot, either the sun or the player serves as the light source. But you can have light sources that are directly in the level and are not affected by that. So for instance here, this square here is a basic light that we placed to show this halogen light here. You can edit these by using the remesh tool, for instance. So remeshing, and then I think it was right click clears it, and left click lets you place the different polygons of the light region. There we go. Fantastic. These kinds of lights and other kinds of stuff, like these items here, or this part here, are different kinds of entities that are also useful to place sometimes. You can add new ones of these by using the insert function. It should show up this dialog here, which lets you pick from a variety of different entities that you can place. So for instance, we can add this balloon here, gives us this thing. And some of these actually have like physical interactions as well and aren't just aesthetics. Or we can say, make a new rope. I have a rope here, and then we can drag its size, dragging the corners, and that gives us a rope. There we go. Once you have an entity that's sort of either a pain to configure or whatever, and you have one that you're happy with, it's often much faster to just copy it than to insert a new one. So for instance, if we want to place a row of balloons, I can just hit C or the clone button over here to copy it and create new parts of these. Using this, it's quite fast to iterate on a level and build stuff with it. Obviously, if you notice that some entities are a mistake or you don't want them anymore, you can also hit delete or the delete key on your keyboard to remove them again. There's a lot of different shortcuts available in the editor that you can use. You can find a listing of those on the editor documentation, which is on kandria.com/editor. That page also outlines a few other things that you can have a look at and should help you find your bearings if you get lost. Now, while it's fun to play around in these existing levels and modify them to your heart's content, you can also build entirely your own. To do this, you want to hit the New button here and confirm. This gives you sort of the basic minimum of a single chunk and the player within an entirely empty region otherwise. Now, once we have this region, we can say, okay, I want to have it a bit bigger. It'll always try to keep it above the minimum size of one screen so that the camera doesn't flip out. Make it a bit wider and then start painting our level in. Okay, now that I have a set of chunks that I'm happy with gameplay-wise, I can move on to actually tiling them in. So first I'm going to switch from the debug tile set to, say, the Tundra one. Oh, this one doesn't have the fucking... Never mind. Let's switch to the... Yeah, sure, let's switch to the camp one. Here as well. All right. There we go. Let's select the desert set and start tiling in things automatically. Paint tool, control click. There we go. Same down here. Paint tool, control click. All right, need to go desert, control click. There we go. Now there's a few tiles that are missing, and we're going to need to put these in manually. Once you're happy with what you've built, you're going to want to try again and make sure that at least everything plays as intended. Once you're sure of that, you're going to want to position the player in the start position where they should start your level. Then you're going to hit the save button while holding control. Doing so will open up a file dialog which lets you pick a place to save your file. So let's say it's going to be test desert.zip. Map files like this are always just zip files that you can upload somewhere and exchange with others. You can also use this file to save your progress and work on it later at some point. If you do have a zip file with a level in it available, all you got to do is control click load, which opens up a similar dialog and lets you simply load in that level. So let's try that again. And it'll spawn us in the right position. And that's pretty much all there is to it. The editor is a bit clunky around the edges at some points, but for the most part it's a pretty pleasant editing experience. And especially with all the tools for prototyping available, making short levels and short tests and challenges like this is pretty easy and quick to do. I hope you give it a shot, and if you have any other questions or have something to show off, then please let us know in the Kandria Discord. We have a specific channel just for level design, so if you have any ideas you want to exchange there as well, then that's the perfect place for it. I hope you give this a shot, and I'm excited to see what you come up with. Thanks a lot for listening, and see you again another time.